Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren, and today we continue with the Hazards of the Old Ones, Part 1, Chapter 5, Lord Milton. And today, people, this video is a bit of an experiment, a test bed, if you will. I went out and I got a new mic. My old mic worked pretty well, I guess, but you had to kind of shout into it. You had to have your face like right next to it, or it would be very dim. But a side effect of that is when you get your plumix, your certain sounds that, the P sounds, it sounds like I was spitting in your face, pleh, patooey. So went out and got a better mic, one with more gain, and just checking to see how it works out. Last week, we saw Countess Sigillus dealing with the unexpected arrival of the Sisterhood of Light and their usual accompaniment of Marines. Sig did not see the sisters, which was a bit of a relief, as being an Ekblad hat, Sig and the sisters have a bad history prior to her being turned and brought into the light, of course. The Marines treated her with every courtesy. She served them a grand feast. They swapped stories, and then basically the Marines told her the sisters are here for Captain Davidge, her husband, who's away on fleet business. And she really needn't worry, because they're not gonna see you anyways. Well, Sig, being a newbie and being rather stubborn, when she hears this, when she hears that the sisters have basically invaded their home and are imposing their will and dictating their terms, isn't gonna sit down for that. Sig is an animal of a different color, and she is not gonna just take the sisters' bullshit. She is going to exercise her powers as Countess, and within Castle Blanchford, she is the top dog with her husband away, and she's not going to let no sister tell her what to do. So the more she hears how the sisters don't want to see her, they want to see Captain Davidge, the more she's determined to get over there and see what the hell they want. Captain Davidge's sister, Lady Poe, tries to talk her out of it, and even Carahill, whom we meet in depth for the first time in the book. We discuss his origin, how Lady Poe made him in a fountain over several months, tries to dissuade her, but Sig manages to grab hold of his little diary that he's always scritching in and sees that he put some key entries in there that she didn't like. She's like, well, I'm gonna go over there to the chapel where the sisters are hanging out and see what they want and just try to stop me. Well, as she headed over there, she entered into some sort of funky time loop. Don't ask me, I just wrote it. I'm not sure how the sisters are doing time loops, but in this book they do. The sisters can do a lot. They can do quite a bit, but a time loop? You never really see the sisters doing that again, ever. They do other things. Oh yeah, they do other things regular, but not a time loop. So, you gotta remember, this is book 2, and Rome is still being constructed. I'm still figuring out what I want to do and what avenues I want to go down, and so the time loop was just a convenient way to hold Sig up a little bit. Of course, we never see them doing that ever again. This week, chapter 5, we head back to the marshes of Esther and take a deep dive into Lord Milton, the Duke of Olin's cranky vassal, who's trying to kill him at every turn, and get to know this guy a little bit more. A couple weird things about Lord Milton. He lives in a big ass manor, and I don't just mean it's big, I mean it's big. It's like it's huge. It's like it should be for a person 20 feet tall. Lord Milton is not 20 feet tall, but that's what it's like. Also, Lord Milton, bucking league trends of youth and health, appears to pretty much everybody as a withered old fart. And that's pretty much unheard of. Hear tell that he's trying to start a new fashion trend, hoping it would go viral. If things can go viral in the league, it's not really a thing. Who knows? In any event, let's learn more about this dude, Lord Milton. Part 1, Chapter 5, Lord Milton. Let's proceed immediately. Oh, look. There he is. I can smell him from here. Let's eat him. Hershey, the Lord of Milton, held his teacup and trembled with frustrated rage as he tried to ignore the voices in his head. He sat on his grand marble mezzanine out in the fine afternoon sunshine, dressed up in his trendy league clothes, his wig, and his old man's cloak. He loved making himself look old. He appeared withered, gray, and bent. He thought it distinguished him from the crowd. Perhaps it will become a fad. He hoped so. Lord Milton liked to be centered around the latest fads. He liked his name mentioned in upscale circles, though in most of league society he was considered a grouchy, unpleasant, insulting, and slightly off-putting character. His bewigged old man appearance really didn't help matters, though nobody had the grace to tell him. He sat at the fine table and drank his tea, the table seemingly too small for his long, skinny arms and legs. He sat ramrod straight. If he didn't, the confining girdle he was wearing underneath his clothes would pain him badly. The things he had to do for appearances. We demand the Duke's flesh, cooked up and served. No, brah, a leg. I demand a leg. The voices again, always the voices. To that point, he pulled a thin gold case from his coat pocket and opened it. Inside was a collection of fragrant leaves resting on a bed of various salts and minerals. He took a leaf and a few grains of salt and put them into his tea, stirring them in with his spoon. The leaf did wonders for him. It helped keep the mind clear and quiet the gaggle of soft voices that had grown loud in the last few years. An unclear mind was a prelude of bad things to come, where the voices won out and got their way. He drank his tea and soon was alone in his head with his thoughts. His wonderful, giant-sized manor rose behind him and cast a huge shadow, with the sun already peaking past noon. His manor was a provincial Esther design, wonderful, exquisite. The manor was ancient. A veneer of new Esther stone covered the original rough-hewn rock that had stood for centuries in the old swamps that once dominated the landscape. It was, by far, the biggest estate in the Esther region size-wise. It wasn't really anything more than a 2-level hut with several large-sized rooms within. A very large, very giant-sized hut. A distance away across the green was House Olin's manor, that ramshackle den of tyrants and thieves, pinch pricks and touchpots. Formerly, it was the South Manor, the squatter's manor. Now, it was the home of House Olin, the house of his master, the Duke. Brah! When the Duke is dead, he will personally demolish that damned manor and everything that went with it and let it become a swamp again, as it was ages ago. Speaking of the Duke, from his vantage point, he could see the Duke, that charlatan, that walking corpse, that uninformed, dead man, strolling about the green, missing his usual duster, scarf, and black hat, his attire of hell, as Milton called it. The Duke had very much taken to his pirate persona in recent years. The romantic swashbuckler he had styled himself after, and dressed the part most of the time. To a man with a clear eye for certain things, such as Lord Milton, the Duke never had seemed like a complete person, but rather a composite, a half-person, his bravado and outrageous behavior a mere varnish. Hiding an insecure wretch, struggling to discover himself, struggling to be accepted by a father who could never embrace or understand him as is. The Duke's late father was a man Lord Milton could deal with and manipulate at his leisure. His son, however, was a stubborn mess. But now, here he was, his costume thrown aside, his clothes clean and regal, strolling the grounds almost like a responsible gentleman, a respectable fellow. A small, black-haired woman wearing an expensive-looking violet dress walked closely at his side, holding a basket, which she was filling with colorful flowers. They browsed the massive garden, the Duke stopping and pointing out various flowers to the woman, who looked up at him and listened intently as he spoke. Then the Duke picked a flower and gave it to her. She smelled it and arranged it into her basket. Every so often she took the flowers he gave her and placed them into her hair. Bah! Duke probably didn't even know the proper names of half those flowers, the ponderous clod. How had this happy situation happened? How? Lord Milton had tried to kill the Duke many times in the past. House Milton, once the original House of Esther in the East, had been under the thumb of House Olin for 300 years. The secret, always that goddamn secret that was held to their knobby throats as a knife. If he wasn't so worried about appearances, if he wasn't so mindful of the repercussions, he'd kill the Duke with his own hands. It should be so easy. He could throttle the Duke to death without half trying, but he had to control himself. Such a display might cost him dearly. There might be no going back from such an action. If he allowed himself the luxury of savage action and primal pleasures, such as personally tucking the Duke into a nice long dirt nap, the voices in his head might grow louder and stay loud, struggling for control. The secret the Duke had on him wasn't good. It was ruinous, and if it became generally known, then House Milton would be pulled apart at the seams. They will flay the flesh from his bones should the secret be made known. And so he sat and chafed, the ever-faithful servant of House Olin, waiting to kill the Duke through unscrupulous means and silence the secret forever. The Duke, in his foppish, with-it demeanor, almost seemed to relish the attempts to pit his feeble skills against those of a legendary schemer like Milton. It became a matter of pride between the two, Lord Milton setting up some elaborate assassination, and the Duke somehow managing to survive it. The Duke's gaggle of Ruthven lackeys didn't help matters, the four of them usually managing to generate enough brain matter to endure the plot with a hail and a hoist. Of course, Lord Milton could, if he chose, simply go to the authorities and turn the Duke in. His pirating activities long suspected and talked about in League society, but never proved. And Milton had reams and reams of evidence in his possession, enough to send the Duke to Hagthorpe Prison for a very long time. Of course, should he do that, Milton himself would then be immediately arrested himself, as he was complicit in the laundering of the Duke's illegal earnings, even skimming off a fair portion for himself. The Duke had reams and reams of evidence in his possession to that fact. To use the vernacular, the two men had the goods on each other. Lord Milton, despite the persistent voices in his head, was a practical man. The Duke, though a shifting, rootless tongue tootler and buffoon supreme, was admirably good at his chosen trade, and money poured in. Why ruining a profitable thing? He'd sit there and launder the proceeds and be a good boy. But after a time, Lord Milton had amassed so much money he felt he really didn't need any more. His investments were blooming, his battery of shadow operations were in full tilt, and as the Duke's income stream of money grew less and less important, Lord Milton's assassination attempts grew more and more mean-spirited. Though careful and meticulous at first, Lord Milton found as he tried and failed to put the Duke to the grave time and time again, that he really no longer cared if anyone else got hurt in the process. He wanted Olin dead, period. There were, of course, the obligatory pedestrian attempts, the knives to the belly, the aimed shots from afar that never seemed to find their mark, and the perfunctory poisoned dishes that rarely made it out of the kitchens. He tried hiring the deadly errands, those death-dealing, tongue-twisting courtesans from Planetfall, with their dreaded red-eyed weed. They wanted too much money, so he backed out. The errands were outraged. Nobody backed out on them. Nobody. And they tried to turn their ire toward him personally. Unfortunately, they were in for the shock of their lives. Those screaming, red-eyed courtesans never knew what hit them when faced with the naked truth as they tried to ply their trade upon his person. Ah, the memories. On a lark, he went at the Duke's 10th wife, Josephina of Jest. He showed the demure, unremarkable woman from Remnath several vids of the Duke philandering around with a batch of dirty courtesans. He'd hoped to enlist her help in poisoning the Duke's coffee. Instead, the vids seemed to drive her into madness. She demanded revenge, and Milton armed the Duchess and her handmaidens with a small arsenal. The lovely lady actually put up an admirable fight, choosing death over defeat. In the end, Josephina gave Milton an idea, and so his master stroke. This time, Lord Milton was certain the Duke would be trying on a new coffin once and for all. His plan to kill the Duke was perfect, multi-layered, and flawless. First, the opening act. He mercilessly filled the Duke's ear with suicidal thoughts of courting a black hat. Courting Zaffin black hats, or fighting them as it was known, was about to become a real trend in the League. The Lord of Blanchford, that northern celebrity and always reluctant trendsetter, had turned a black hat in space and, in the process, forged for himself a fine and loving countess. He also had introduced the League to Bethriel of Moan, an enchanting, sultry vision whom Lord Milton himself had to admit was much to his liking. He had danced with her at the Netherday ball in Armenelos and felt a connection. He hoped to court her. It seemed black hats weren't so bad after all. Just look at them. Look what they had to offer. They were usually quite beautiful under their faceless black masks. They were seductive, powerful, and full of love and new feelings previously denied to them, and the League couldn't get enough of them. Still, Lord Blanchford's triumph aside, black hats were nothing to trifle with. Lord Tilbury of Dexter, he had heard, had tried to turn a black hat and was sent home in several boxes. Tilbury, the great fop, had gone out into Zaffin space with his entourage as if on an outing, and been horrifically slain and sent back in pieces except for his head, which was said to be kept alive and screaming via arcane means in some rank black hat temple. Seeing a grand opportunity, he slid into the Duke's ear and railed him on how some paltry Northern League lord, some puny vith, had turned a foul black hat and made her his countess. He told him truthfully how her evil had transformed into a bounty of love. He shamed the Duke. If some fool lord from the north, some Vith could accomplish such a thing, then certainly the mighty Duke of Olin, the pride of Esther, could do it too. Grinning and sucking on his pipe, the Duke listened and took the bait. The stage set, Lord Milton sat back and waited. As commanded, the Duke took off in his black ship, leaving his Ruthven pets behind in the bars. Lord Milton fully expected the Duke to be killed in the capture, to be likewise sent home in a box, as Lord Tilbury had. Certainly a fearsome, well-defended black hat could kill off a single foolish attacker. If fortune smiled, then the Duke's severed body parts would be arriving at any time in the Daily Post. If so, his head, if available, shall soon be sitting on his mantle, varnished and forever unhappy. But to his infinite shock, not only did the Duke survive, but he actually managed to bring a snarling, writhing black hat home to his manor, bound tightly in waft-proof chains. How, in the name of creation? Shaking his wigged head, Lord Milton sighed. No matter. The capture was simply the opening salvo in the Duke's death cannonade. Many more kill shots were to follow. To the interlude, from his reading, Milton knew that Black Hat's shadow tech will certainly be the Duke's end. That darkness, that ancient substance which the Black Hats commanded, grew, festered, and would allow her to dispatch the Duke in any number of creative ways. With it, she could simply form it into a weapon of some sort and slice him in two, or she could use it to create a slathering monster to devour the Duke, or she could cover him with invisible Shadowtech snares for some spectacular time-released effect. Perhaps his genitals will explode, preferably out in public, where the embarrassing spectacle could be properly appreciated. Shadowtech was formidable and difficult to deal with, but from his reading, Milton knew that certain herbs, salts, and chemicals heaped in abundance around the Black Hat's naked body will serve to inhibit the growth of Shadowtech and cast it so slow in growing that essentially it would be rendered moot. Such knowledge could save the Duke. Of course, Lord Milton was not going to let him know of this. Let him find out on his own, the hard way, the painful way. But confound it! That Ruthven soul-slapper sage had apparently read the same books. Under his guidance, the Duke stripped the Black Hat naked in his dungeon and hauled in a steady stream of nostril-wrenching herbs and other noxious materials. The place stank. Milton could detect the smell all the way to his manor if the wind was right, causing him to require a perfume-laced hanky to clear his offended hooked nose. The Black Hat's Shadowtech was essentially out of play. But Shadowtech wasn't the only tool available to her. No. She could shock the Duke to death with a Stenfield. She could unleash the mask, the infamous phantom hand, and kill him from afar. Or she could simply point at him and watch the Duke explode. All of these illegal Black Hat gifts were based off the stare, a potent gift. Of course, if they were to encase her in an arcane circle designed to counteract the stare, then all of those weapons would be denied to her. Only a heavy session at the library or in the HoloNet would uncover that information. There was certainly no possible way the Duke and his noisome bands of boot-knocking buzzkills would figure that out. But a fie upon them! Sure enough, that annoying, nose-banging nerd, Sage of Ruthven, painted her into an arcane symbol circle, effectively quashing her ability to use gifts based off the stare. Miserable gods, more weapons to the bin. So far, the Duke and his duster-wearing diaper soilers had been quite capable at turning aside the first few aspects of his most perfect of assassination attempts. No matter. Milton would now take the situation into his hands personally. The simpleton's favor was off. Now the hard gloves will be applied with vigor. Lord Milton had at the Black Hat's manacles. He, using his little-known powers, snuck into the dungeon in the dead of night, through the window, and, crawling down the wall like a bug, not even the Black Hat could detect him. First, he electrified the manacles. At the leisurely touch of a button, he could put an agonizing jolt into the black hat, and he jolted her often to make sure she was good and stoked at all times. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd get up, trot over to his controller in his nightshirt, and give her a good jolting, just to make sure the black hat and the Duke were getting their beauty rest. Second, he tricked the lock. Again, at the touch of a button, he could unlock the manacles, freeing her at key moments so the little maniac could escape and kill the Duke when he least expected it. Again, that failed. The Duke able to fight her off and reshackle her time and time again. The nearest thing was when one of the Ruthvens, a little one, got half strangled to death, his head caught in the locked vise-like legs of the black hat, ready to pop like a ripe grape. Oh, but he wished he had a vid shot of that undignified scene to circulate. Eventually, he shocked the black hat so much and so often that the current destroyed the unlocking mechanism, and he never had the opportunity to replace it, as the Duke posted a security guard around her to watch for further escape attempts. Then there was the matter of her TK. TK was more often considered a venue of the Sisterhood of Light, and they could do wonders with it. However, black hat painters also had well-developed TK, and this specimen in the Duke's dungeon was clearly a painter. Her TK was also not squashed by the simple circle as her sten, point, and mass had been. He, through wickedly subtle channels, made the Duke aware of a certain expensive amulet one which supposedly diminished the power of the TK. In reality, it heightened and focused her power, her TK running rampant, even managing to throw the Duke out of a window. But too bad there was a reflecting pool waiting to break his fall. The main issue was that in her sick and diminished state, with her shadow tech kept low, she couldn't focus her TK and rip him apart. She could only flail about with it, grasping at anything, making a mess, not able to finish the Duke. Again, Sage of Ruthven, ever the library lackey, ever the Billy Bookworm, discovered a real TK suppressing charm, and getting it around her head, her TK was taken out of the game. It occurred to Milton that if success was to be achieved, he needed to separate the Duke from his trio of Ruthven touchpots and pinchbricks. John of Ruthven, the little one, little Johnny, though brash and useful, was quick-witted and able to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Peter of Ruthven was a calm, collected, reasonable voice in the Duke's ear, and his mechanical abilities could not be denied. And Sage, the Elgis, the pseudo-intellect, the library lounger, was learned enough to be a constant threat. There was nothing for it. The Ruthvens had to go. This situation was to be a dance for two. To get rid of the Ruthvens, Milton himself financed through back channels the secret transportation of a cargo of pure grain spirits to Hoban, an irresistible prize for an enterprising privateer like the Duke, as such a cargo would fetch a handsome sum in Zaffin space. Though ruinously expensive and costly to set up, Milton knew he could recoup most of the cost in the end. He'd simply skim off a bit more than usual when he laundered the profits. The spirits weren't all that costly. It was the endless screens of secrecy and subterfuge, the paid-off merchants, the bought porters and bribed officials. Also, the secret shipment appeared to be sufficiently hidden. All it took were a few well-spoken words in the pubs, and the news of the secret cargo spread like a bad smell. Sure enough, the Ruthvens took off to intercept the shipment, leaving the Duke all alone with his wailing, wretched black hat. His quarry, alone and naked, Milton slithered in to begin constricting with a vengeance. He gave ear to the Duke, listened to him lament that the turning of this black hat was not going well, that she failed to calm no matter what he tried. He said that her health was beginning to fail, and that she was injuring herself at an alarming rate. So, Lord Milton thought, the poisoned food he was able to slip her was finally taking effect. When the Duke was dead, he couldn't have a full-powered black hat running around. She could wreak havoc. The sisters might arrive. He thought he'd seen a strange figure lurking about the Duke's manor. He thought perhaps the black hat had escaped, but it wasn't her. From his reading, Lord Milton knew the old stories, that black hats were surrounded by a shell of darkness. This shell, though it could not be seen, kept them in a perpetual daze, in an evil trance from which they could do nothing but feel rage and hate. The old text also said that this darkness was eternal, that it could not be broken. Obviously, the texts were out of date, as somehow, some way, Lord Blanchford had done it several times. He must have used some sort of vith magic on her. But whatever, the Duke could not do what Lord Blanchford did. The unseen darkness remained stubbornly intact. The vith. If he was afraid of anything, it was the vith. He had an ancient inherited fear and loathing of them. Even the voices in his head were afraid of them. The vith are mighty. They drove us before them on the field. Hama of the vith, a great man. We die. 8 arms, 10 arms, a chest of breasts. We die. Enough of that. Now for it. The finale, the master stroke. Milton, whispering in his ear, told him of a magical imp, a laughing silver creature that might be able to help him in this matter, to calm the black hat. Giving him a strange silver medallion, he bade him touch the imp's image and he will come. The Duke wasn't sure. Surely Peter or Sage would advise against such a thing. But they weren't around. Milton lied and said he'd personally seen the imp in action on the wharfs of Calvert, and that it was a benign, wonderful creature. Nothing but good could come from this. Smiling, hope in his eyes, the Duke took the medallion. Of course Milton had heard no such thing. Quite the opposite. The silver creature he had heard was a evil manifestation, one that will flay the flesh of any summoning it. That's what they said in Calvert. He'd stolen the magical medallion from some idiot robber lord from Planetfall who smelled of catnip and wore a tabby cloak. Apparently, it had been a gift from a popular lady of standing whom he was courting. The robber lord, drunk, capering about, was showing it off at a pub. Lord Milton, nursing a mug of warm ale, asked to see it. He accepted the medallion, palmed it, and gave him back a silver coin, which the foolish drunken lord did not discover. Certainly this silver imp, once summoned, will tear the Duke apart and feast on his bones. The Ruthvens will arrive home to find their Duke a torn, partially consumed carcass. Lord Milton's only regret? He couldn't watch the flesh-eating spectacle in person. Perhaps he could get a vid network installed at the Duke's manor before the devouring. But insufferable gods! Things could not have gone worse. Not only did the imp not do him the courtesy of tearing the Duke apart, devouring his flesh, foul creature apparently agreed to assist him and was somehow successful in turning the black hat, calming her into compliance. What the... Whisked out of the dungeon into a soft bed, the Duke sat by her side, holding her little black hat hand as she recovered, her injuries healing, free of the poisoned food, her appetite returning. So, the Duke survived, and the black hat survived. The plot foiled, though unwittingly. In fact, the plot had assisted in this happy outcome, the imp connection being a complete, resounding failure. The only salvageable component of this whole sad affair was the silver medallion itself. With the Duke preoccupied with his lady, Milton had no trouble reacquiring it. Fascinating. It was some sort of point-to-point portal powered by sorcery. He tried summoning the imp himself, hoping to enslave it to his wishes. He borrowed a whole host of machines and equipment from some of his less than savory science ministry friends and made to waylay the imp when it appeared. It did not come. Later, as Lord Milton retired to his bedchamber, he was assailed in filth. As he pulled open the door, he was hit by a cascade of feces and rotten fish held aloft in a rusty, now overturned pail, hidden there by some miscreant. There was a note at the bottom of the pail. "Nice try. Signed, the imp." Miserable cretin. Milton sent the medallion off to a few of his science ministry friends for further study. What was done via sorcery could most certainly be reproduced mechanically. Lord Milton added the imp's name to his revenge list, along with the Duke and the Black Hat, their names carved there in stone. And now here was the Duke strolling in the sun with his Black Hat prize. Her hair was done, her face painted, and her basket full of flowers. The Duke was doting on her like never before, as if he actually cared about her. Sighing, Lord Milton put his cup down and rang his bell. A slight, wispy servant appeared. "My lord," he said. Lord Milton wiped his lips. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Something smelled good. Ellington, what smells so tasty? "Lunch, my lord. A lovely tureen of beast's gibble. It will soon be ready." Milton sat up and rubbed his hands together. "Ah, excellent. I am starved. Now, dear Ellington, please look down into the garden and tell me what you see." Ellington the servant looked. "I see the Duke and a lovely lady enjoying the afternoon, my lord," he said with a wheezy breeze. "Really?" Milton said, grabbing his spoon. "That's not what I see. I see a dead man and a dead woman taking their last few breaths." Milton gawked at Ellington with his beady eyes cloaked to look old. "I also see a man who is about to greatly improve his situation by making sure that those two end up dead." Ellington grinned. "Yes, most certainly, my lord. Do it soon. I have a plan." And with that, we conclude Chapter 5, Lord Milton. I hope you allowed me to indulge myself. Whenever Milton's around, it always takes a bit of a comedic turn, I must say, and I was just trying to ham it up because that chapter itself is rather hammy. We find out a lot of the things that the Duke had been experiencing was indeed influenced by Lord Milton. Most of the things, the Black Hat getting sick, the Black Hat kept continuing to jolt about in pain, the Black Hat getting out of her manacles, was all orchestrated by the Duke as he was sitting there in his manor shocking her to death with his little controller. He even gave the Duke his little coin with, I'll say the name, Carahill's face on it, hoping that Carahill would rip his ass apart. And then later, curious about this coin, he tried to capture Carahill. Of course, Carahill sniffed him out and doused him with feces and fish guts. That's Carahill. That's just his sense of humor. Milton reminisces on the various things he's tried to do to kill the Duke. He's the one who armed the Duke's 10th wife, Josephina of Jest, to take arms against him. He's usually behind all the rotten things that happen to the Duke. It's usually Lord Milton who is responsible. But anyways, so the Lord Milton is kind of weird. He can do all kinds of strange things, and we will find more out about him as the chapters go on. And we see through his eyes, through his narrative, that Carahill was successful in breaking the Black Abbess's clutch, and the Black Hat quickly turned from evil and is now a fully fledged person, seeing new things through new eyes, seeing all the wonders of Esther with the Duke at her side. And Lord Milton's not having any of it, and he just hired his servant to kill the both of them. And we will see how that turns out in later chapters. I hope this recording went well. Again, this is an experiment. I've not used this mic before. I It seems like it's pretty robust, but we will see. In any event, next week, Chapter 6, Captain Davidge. And so as we move along in the story, we finally see Captain Davidge, the hero of Book 1. And here he is again on his fleet business. So we will see what portends that leads to next week. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.